Okay. Well, that was a fabulous session to start off with. We now have another Phil, just to make things confusing for me. Phil Scanlon, welcome to the stage. Phil is global head of pre-sales at Solace, which is another super exciting company. Phil, just a quick intro, has over 20 years of experience in roles around the globe. He joined Solace in 2016 and is responsible for the APJ and ME. I assume that's Middle East or Middle East and Europe. Did I get that right? Yeah. Field technical organization. Please correct me when you go on there. So you're going to be talking to us about event-driven architecture, which is an area near and dear to my heart. So please take it away.
Great, thanks, Akil. And yeah, so it's I've made it easier about remembering the Middle East, and I now just look after the global team, so it's made it a bit easier for everyone. So look, very excited to be here today to talk to the API Days audience and ecosystem. That the people involved are an audience of people I think are very relevant for event-driven APIs, given the as Phil just mentioned, 14 years of RESTful APIs really being the predominant way of communicating between systems, between companies. And you mentioned a few emerging approaches such as GraphQL. We're very much behind async API, and we're really sort of seeing an evolution of different types of APIs based on different requirements. And this isn't a or B type of problem. This is what's the best tool for the job. And really, hopefully through this talk, you'll understand a little bit about where we come from and how that relates to traditional RESTful APIs and the parallels as well. So what I'm going to talk about, start with a bit about events and event-driven architecture, then go into a little bit of background on something called the event mesh and the event portal. And then we'll talk a little bit about event API products. So how we can expose all the events in a department or organization as a bundle, how we might go about creating that and looking at how we do that hands-on. And if we have some time at the end, we can talk about some customers, some samples of use cases where people have used event-first architecture. So let's get into it. So firstly, let's talk a little bit about events. So, everyone's very familiar with things happening in the real world. So if we look at a ship moving along, it's transmitting its position, it's emitting events saying this is where I am. But there also may be an event saying the ship has slowed down. So that event may get broadcast. The event happens, but then systems may react to that. So the arrival time of that vessel may be adjusted. So there's a reaction to an event. With logistics again, for fleet management, with a truck arriving and docking at a logistics center, they arrive at a gate. A loading team may be dispatched, but also the arrival at the gate is an event. There are products on that. Products inside of that truck. So the arrival may then cascade some other events to happen. So these events can be harnessed and leveraged around things like real-time visibility. In connected escalators and elevators, we've seen companies that traditionally would supply equipment, such as an escalator or an elevator, also wanting to do preventative maintenance. And when you do preventative maintenance, you want to know a lot more information about the health of that asset. So if an asset such as an elevator is running, if a motor fails or a motor is giving off some sensor that shows a failure may be coming, you can dispatch a technician. So you can move from reacting to events rather than having to go out and keep checking sensors. So the abundance of events and information from things like IoT and connected devices is allowing companies to think about how they build their business, how they offer their services. And then finally, and this is really where, if you look at event-driven architecture, event-driven thinking, it was really, the early days of capital markets where systems were being built from scratch, way before standards, way before, open APIs and async APIs. With capital markets, having something like a price change of an FX or an equity, an order being placed, a trade happening. These are events, and there's a reaction to these events. And in capital markets, it was to make trades, to make money, and to take positions, to get out of positions. And really, the faster you could react to the event, the better your systems could be. So really, there was a drive to it. Wasn't hey, this could be a better way of doing it. This was the way that capital market systems have always been built, and Solace, through our history, have been helping in that market. What we've really seen, though, is the approach is being adopted, and we'll get to that in a minute. You may also see, with events, events have become, with data, people have taken a very sort of data is everywhere, data is the new oil, data is what we react to. So that's correct, but data is really derived from events. So, an event happens, that event, just as an event, may be useful to some systems. Other systems may want to take that data and stream and process that data. So, the two things kind of often go hand in hand, but don't have to necessarily be dealt with the same technology. And that's important as we look further on to look at, how we see events and data being treated across a broader system rather than just in the context of building one application. So let's look at event-driven architecture. So really, event-driven architecture drives real-time data movement. So, as things happen, data is moved. And we would compare that to, traditional batch or to traditional, kind of periodic polling of systems. So with adopting EDA, I don't put the data into a data store and then move it after the fact. I take that event as my first-class citizen, and I react to that event, and I do something with that event. And what that really allows me to do is treat data in motion and unlock the value of that data, react to that data, react to the event quicker, and do things like real-time customer insights, very responsive customer experience. And as we've sort of all sick to death of hearing about it, but over the last 2 years with a lot of technology, a lot of experiences moving from the real world to online as people have had to shift to real-time retail systems. It's really driven this investment in EDA into the retail companies because they really want to provide that responsive customer experience. And they can't do it without adopting EDA into that customer-facing piece. Then looking at my batch and delivery, taking these streams of events and what we call decoupling the enterprise. And the decoupling part is critical because I think a lot of times when we look at things like API-based integration, we look at SOA type integration, we look at really pushing things from system A to system B. And even though they're decoupled in location, they're quite tightly coupled in terms of, I'm sending the data to you. With decoupling, we're really decoupling. So I'm publishing some information, I'm sharing something. What reacts to that can change over time. And that really drives agility, flexibility, and scalability into IT capability. So let's look at EDA and how does it work. So if we look at some of those scenarios that we talked about earlier, customers buying products, temperatures detected in motors, passengers boarding flights, applications need to know about this. So with a customer buying a product, we've got inventory, we've got merchandise, we've got customer loyalty, and take for example that inventory system. If a customer buys a product online from a buy online pickup in store, inventory becomes critical because I need to get that inventory off the shelf as soon as possible so I can commit to that order. But I also need to know if my inventory is very, very low, I need to manage that experience of people coming online and trying to buy something that's not there, or in a store taking something that's actually been allocated. So that real-time inventory of things on shelf becomes quite critical. With merchandising as well, and with customer loyalty, that the nirvana of customer loyalty is being able to, inside of the situation, react with a customer, but that customer is now transacting across multiple channels. So there's a lot more events and a lot more coordination going on. We talked about the escalators earlier on. We've got safety, personal alerts, maintenance scheduling, really reacting to those IoT sensor events. And then passengers boarding flights, and hopefully we'll all get back to being able to get on a flight. I'm certainly in Australia this week, but thankfully we'll be in Singapore next week for my first flight in a while. But one of the things that the airlines try and do is around loyalty, and as we see people move more into the traveling again, being able to board a flight, but react to that boarding event in real time. And what we found just before COVID with a few of the airlines we'd started working with is they were really trying to modernize their back end. Their back end boarding systems were batch based, and they really were not getting the events about passenger loyalty from the boarding systems till 30, 40 minutes after the flight had left. And that's critical in today's competitive, hyper-personalized experience. So, these events applications need to know about things, and then we'll do things. And there's some examples there. So what we're seeing, and EDA, this is not a system you build, this is an architectural approach. And what we're seeing as people have moved beyond, a pilot to sort of broader adoption is, a lot of these systems are global in nature. And even if, depends on the size of your globe, even if you're purely based in say, Singapore, you may have some of your systems running in CRM systems that are based out of the West Coast of America. You may have some outsourced third-party logistics systems that work in a different place. So really that global really means that the assets, the compute, the places that events are happening are actually distributed across a broader landscape. Not everything runs in the same data center anymore, and certainly doesn't just run in the customer's data center. So what we're seeing is this whole hybrid and multi-cloud requirement for events that are happening in different parts of the connected cloud environments to be treated as events. As well as this cloud, hybrid cloud sort of environment, we're also seeing the technology. So you'll have, third-party systems that you're leveraging. You'll have open standards-based technologies. You'll have legacy mainframe. You'll have some data-centric applications. You may have some stream processing applications. These technologies are all quite diverse, but they all have events in common, and they all share events. What we're also seeing is a requirement around enterprise grade. So, the event-driven infrastructure is required to be, always available, always online. Having some simplicity. One of the things around adoption of REST was really its simplicity of, being able to find an API, consume that API. And then finally, around asynchronicity. So asynchronous, so decoupled, so publish, subscribe, send and receive. So I've emitted my event. I don't necessarily wait for a response. I know that will happen eventually. Okay, and this is really where, brief plug, where Solace have where we exist. It's what we do. It's all we do, and we have some technologies around that. So help you look at kind of where EDA is helping people operate in real time and digital decoupling. So we're moving away from batch. One of the other things that we're looking at is, you move away from this periodic polling. So if you're always polling a system to see if something's changed, that's a great candidate for it to move to an event-driven architecture. So one of the things we've seen, and I've personally seen over the last 2 years, is this move away from API-only capabilities to API and event-driven as being first-class citizens, both mandatory and both required for digital transformation, for digital decoupling, for digitization of more things. And there's certainly, don't see EDA as a replacement for API-led. It really just is very complementary. We're seeing that with a lot of the event-driven integration initiatives that we've been working with lately. So looking at some of that API-only integration, that's kind of the picture on the left. So as things grow, as you sort of move more and more point to point, it becomes more of this web of integration. With decoupling, those APIs and events, because you're decoupling the publisher from the subscriber, you can have these one-to-many relationships, but you can also adapt and scale quite quickly. And the key thing there is without having to change the existing sender. So the sender sends once, your consumers consume many. So let's talk a little bit around some of the areas we've seen this, and then we'll get into event API products. So firstly, I talked a little bit about integration. I've certainly seen the adoption of API-centric or API only into API plus events as being a real ramp up, and it's very clear with a lot of the customers we've talked to who are using API led that they're having problems around responsiveness to customers. They're having problems around system availability, about trying to run APIs across these very, very hybrid environments, trying to run APIs across systems that run at different pace. So APIs that run in a real-time, just built brand new system that's very, very new, but leveraging some data that's on the mainframe that's really, really slow. So trying to get those two and working out how do I better solve that, adopting events. IoT is inherently event-driven. Event-driven microservices is something that, as we're seeing people build modern decoupled microservices platforms, pushing all of the events through and the data that they can contain across into analytics and event streaming. And then finally, the adoption of event-driven APIs. So the two areas we see as the pieces of that. And for those familiar with APIs, API gateways, and API portals, your API gateway equivalent is the event mesh. So this is a foundation layer, allows you to publish events, to stream events across the enterprise and across different places using open protocols, open standards, being polyglot. So one application can be written in Ruby using REST. Another application can use MQTT, can use MQP or different interfaces to be able to publish, subscribe events. But secondly, and this is really where I'll move on to today, around event governance. So once we've built some API, we've built some events, we've described them. With APIs, we have an API portal. We have a place where you can register an API and people can come and get access. With events, it becomes more important because you also want to keep track of who's consuming the events, because that's not inherently visible from the design time. You're decoupling things. So event governance is very important for people as they see. Sorry, I'm asking. Okay, sorry. Saw a note in the chat that wasn't for me. So seeing the event mesh and event management as complementary. So looking at API products and event APIs. So API products, bit of a reminder, a collection of related APIs that can be used to meet a business function. So you may think of internally, you've got a load of APIs. You want to join those up together and expose them as a set of APIs. Event-driven APIs, very similar to normal APIs, but the key critical difference is they use a push model rather than request response. And you can do streaming over REST, and it's been quite successful. But as you scale more and more and more, you have a lot of data problems with, you need to store that data at the edge. You need to make sure that data is fresh so that data can get stale. With event driven, it takes the opposite approach, that we push information to the event mesh, and then consumers of events on the event mesh are told that something's changed, and it's real time. There's no data store in the middle. It's just a push straight through. And it really fulfills a different pattern. And really requires architects to be aware of this, to understand the approaches, to understand the advantages that can be got. So to look very quickly at an example of that, so with a REST API, we place an order. Great, and you wouldn't make that an event-driven API, because your customer makes a decision they want to place an order. So they'll log on to the internet, they'll place that order. They don't need to be connected all the time. They'll connect, place an order, they get the confirmation. But behind the scenes, and this is sometimes where we talk about the north-south being the RESTful API, and then the east-west being the asynchronous API, with event-driven APIs, you publish the orders happened. Now, there's an inventory management system that wants to know about that. There's a shipping management system, but there's also the CRM system. So many systems can consume that event. And there may be also other stakeholders. So there may be other uses of that event after the fact. And there may be replies that come back and push things through to the order management system. So looking at that, let's quickly look at event API products. So basically, with asynchronous APIs or event-based APIs, and we have our applications, lower level. These may be using REST. They may be having REST interfaces. We may have systems that don't have REST APIs, but these are all publishing events. And they can publish events either via the API through something like a micro gateway, or having the API gateway push the event out into the event mesh. Or in the case of a legacy system, you may use something like a database trigger, or you may have some, in the API of the system, be able to push that event out. And then a product catalog and a marketing. So a number of applications that create events. What we really want to do is to be able to get those events to the right consumers across those different systems. So really have that decoupling. So we're not connecting to all the original applications. We're connecting to the events that have been emitted by those applications across the event mesh. So if we look at those and how they may sit, so those three examples. So we've got our order status being received, processed, and shipped. We'll bundle that together into an order status API, and we'll use something called async API to be able to publish and expose that. And if you really want to get into the detail of that, we have a session tomorrow where we're going to go through using asynchronous events and reacting to those and consuming events in real time. Again, the inventory may be pulling events from different systems and exposing those across via async API. And again, for promotions, so different systems, but the events being brought together. So what we see is essentially a whole load of lower level system events being brought up into the enterprise level, being grouped together as event API products, and then being exposed via a developer portal. So very similar to if you look at the layers of APIs that you may already be familiar with. So there will be systems that are events that are system level. There'll be ones that become enterprise level and then be grouped together into an enterprise product. So just look quickly. So we talked about governance. I know we're running short on time, but just quickly look in a couple of minutes of the event portal. So the first thing we have to accept is that our events are coming from many different systems. So those may be events in a Kafka system. They may be with Solace. There may be other systems. The event portal gives me visibility of the events in my entire company, not just from a single technology provider. First thing we want to do is discover those events. So being able to run scans, so with things like Confluent attached to the Confluent cluster, pull out the events, pull out the schemas, and import those in, and pull those into the repository, so that we can then see what topics there are, what messages are coming out, and upload those. We can associate those with endpoints and apps and domains. And then what we get left with is a model, a view of all of the events, regardless of which systems they're coming from, pulled together into a visual model. Much like an API catalog, we have an event catalog. So we can have all of the events across my entire ecosystem being displayed there. And then finally, and this is the part around the API products. So once we've got our number of APIs, we've got the ability to pull together different parts of the ecosystem and expose that via an API. And we don't have time to walk through that today, but tomorrow, if you want to see that, if you want to come to our booth, we can show you how that would work to be able to expose that as a website and allow consumers to come and get to that. So just in closing, EDA, for those that haven't already got on that journey, it's really something that we've seen accelerate massively. If you want to sort of get a view on that, have a look at Gartner's trend adoptions. really see that this has been something that's been accelerating. If you are doing work, then events are first-class citizens. These are not things that be put into data stores first and then treated as a sort of a second byproduct. EDA, the use cases, real-time business, digitization of anything, of interactions, of processes, IoT, and hybrid cloud. Foundations are important. So there are different types of event brokers, so it's important to understand those. We had an EDA summit last year where we went into some details. There is an EDA summit coming up on the 4th of May, or May the 4th be with you. You can register that. It's not a Solace summit. It's an open industry format that we organize to drive awareness and adoption of EDA within across all industries. It's a global event. We've got some great keynote speakers coming in from any place. It's free to register, and it covers other vendors as well as Solace. So it's not just us telling you about Solace. Really, the unknown piece, decoupling, pulling things apart, is very important. I think if we create these tightly coupled systems today, we're locked in and we're stuck and we don't get the return on investment. So understanding how to decouple is important, and governance is obviously critical. So I'll close there. I know we're running short on time.
Thank you. Yeah. Fabulous. Hey, look, thank you so much. I've used Solace personally. I think it's an incredibly powerful platform. I'm really excited about some of the events and the workshops you guys are running. There have been a few questions, Phil, if you're interested in
Sure.
Scrolling back through the chat, but I think Jason from your team has been answering them. So
okay,
it's all okay. But look, thank you so much for the presentation. EDA is pretty exciting. It's not an innovation space anymore. I think it's become early adopter, potentially even a late adopter area at the moment. So very exciting. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Akhil.